The diagnosis folder sat on the worn leather of the passenger seat, a bland manila rectangle that felt disproportionately heavy, as if it contained lead instead of paper. Silas Walker kept one hand on the steering wheel, the knuckles white with the tension of his grip, while the other drummed a restless, arrhythmic tattoo against his thigh. The cardiologist's words played on a cold, clinical loop in his mind: moderate heart failure. A manageable condition. 15 to 20 years with proper management. At 63, after a lifetime of building something from nothing, transforming a single dilapidated duplex into a commercial real estate empire that spanned Tampa, he knew he should be feeling a wave of relief. He had expected a death sentence. He had received a reprieve. But as he merged onto the crosstown highway, the sprawling, sun-drenched city of Tampa blurring past his window, the feeling that clung to him was not gratitude, but a profound and weary dread. His destination was his son's beautiful South Tampa home, a craftsman-style showpiece nestled among ancient, twisting oaks, a house he had made possible with a $50,000 check they believed was his last great act of generosity. The real unspoken test of his life was not his faltering heart, but the character of his only son, and that examination was reaching its critical final phase. For 3 long years, Silas had lived inside a carefully constructed fiction. After selling Walker commercial properties, he had meticulously crafted the persona of the modest retiree, a man who had cashed out just enough to live simply and needed the charity of his family. He had downsized from his own spacious paid-off home in Carrollwood to a small condo, and then, when Michael had tentatively suggested it, into their converted home office, the smallest room in their house, a space that still smelled faintly of ink and ambition, where his single bed and dresser were crowded against boxes he'd never fully unpacked. It was a psychological experiment, a test of loyalty and love he felt compelled to administer. Every month, with the solemn ritual of a tithe, he would hand his son Michael a plain white envelope stuffed with $3,100 bills, $3,000 in total, his contribution to the household. He watched with a sinking heart as the initial slightly embarrassed gratitude in Michael's eyes slowly faded, replaced by a bland, automatic acceptance. The money became his due, a transaction that erased any deeper sense of familial obligation. Pulling into the driveway now, the tires crunching on the expensive crushed shell, he saw the house not as a home, but as a stage where the final act of his familial drama was about to play out. The $50,000 he'd given them had bought this stage, and he was the lead actor in a role he was growing desperately tired of playing. Inside, the air was cool and carried the faint, astringent scent of lavender cleaner and simmering quinoa. The house was a testament to Jennifer's relentless pursuit of aesthetic perfection, every pillow plumped, every surface gleaming, a curated life devoid of joyful clutter. His 8-year-old granddaughter Olivia, with her mother's sharp, intelligent eyes, was setting the table with a precision that belied her age, placing each fork and knife with solemn care. In the living room, his 6-year-old grandson Lucas was a whirlwind of joyful noise, crashing toy cars together with explosive sound effects. "Grandpa!" Lucas yelled, detonating from the floor and launching himself at Silas's legs. The impact sent a familiar dull ache through Silas's lower back, a persistent reminder of his mortality. He caught the boy, his heart constricting with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "Easy there, demolition derby," he managed, his voice a gravelly whisper as he ruffled the boy's soft hair. Michael emerged from his home office, a room Silas had helped design, wearing the uniform of his success, a polo shirt with a discreet logo, and jeans that cost more than the first car Silas had ever owned. At 38, Michael had his father's broad shoulders and strong jaw, but his eyes lacked the hard-won resilience Silas had earned through decades of struggle. "Hey, Dad, how was the appointment?" Michael asked, his tone casual, almost distracted. Silas held up the manila folder like a shield. "Got the results," he said, his voice carefully neutral. He watched his son's face, searching for a flicker of genuine concern, but found only a polite, surface-level interest. "Let's talk after dinner," Silas suggested, wanting to deliver the news when they were all a captive audience, a final unspoken probe into the depths of their empathy. Dinner was a quiet, tense affair. Jennifer's grilled chicken and roasted vegetables were perfectly cooked but tasted of obligation, not love. The conversation was stilted, circling around the children's school projects and Michael's work. When the moment arrived, Silas placed his fork down carefully, the click of silver on china sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "The doctor gave me the results today," he began, his eyes moving from Michael's politely attentive face to Jennifer's carefully composed mask. "It's heart failure at a moderate stage." He let the words hang in the air, heavy and ominous. He watched as Jennifer's fork paused halfway to her meticulously glossed lips. Her eyes, the color of chilled seawater, darted toward Michael for a fraction of a second, a silent, frantic communication he wasn't meant to see. "That sounds concerning, Silas," she said, her voice meticulously calibrated to convey a nurse's office level of sympathy. "You'll need to be very careful from now on." Michael nodded, reaching for his water glass as if for support. "Yeah, Dad, that's tough news. You just have to make sure you follow the doctor's orders to the letter." The responses were hollow, scripted, devoid of the visceral shock or fear that should accompany such news about a parent. It was Olivia, her small face pinched with worry, who offered the only genuine reaction. "Are you going to be okay, Grandpa?" she whispered, her voice small in the vast, silent dining room. Her concern was a tiny warm flame in the coldness of the room. And then, with a brutality that took his breath away, Jennifer simply changed the subject. "Michael, did you finish the Henderson proposal? We need to discuss it." Just like that, his diagnosis, his future, his very mortality, were dismissed as trivial inconveniences. Silas felt something inside him fracture, a final essential chord of hope snapping silently in his chest, finished his meal in silence, chewing the flavorless food, memorizing the coldness in their eyes, collecting the evidence for the verdict he now knew was inevitable. Later, in the cramped confines of his bedroom, the walls seemed to press in on him. He opened the top drawer of his dresser and retrieved the familiar envelope, the monthly payment that had become a symbol of his diminished status. He found Michael in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher with a methodical efficiency that felt like an accusation. "This month's contribution," Silas said, handing him the envelope. Michael took it without meeting his eyes, without a word of thanks, and tucked it into the back pocket of his expensive jeans as if it were a grocery list. The gesture was one of such casual entitlement that it felt like a physical slap. Retreating to his room, Silas sat on the edge of his bed, the springs groaning in protest, and listened to the sounds of the house settling around him, the distant laughter of the children, the low murmur of the television, the closing of their bedroom door down the hall. Then the voices started. First, they were a low, indistinct rumble, but soon they sharpened, rising in pitch and venom until they cut through the thin drywall with terrifying clarity. He stood, drawn by a morbid, heart-shattering pull, and stepped into the dark hallway, a ghost in his own son's home. Jennifer's voice, stripped of all its social grace, was a scalpel. "Get that sick old man out of my house. I don't want him near my children with these diseases. He's dragging us down, Michael. Can't you see that?" Each word was a shard of ice piercing his heart. Sick old man. Diseases. Dragging us down. He heard Michael's weak, placating murmur, a pathetic attempt to calm the storm. "Jenny, he's my father. Where is he supposed to go?" Her reply was a torrent of pure, unadulterated contempt. "I don't care. A nursing home, an apartment, anywhere. We gave him a place when he needed it. Now he needs to figure out his own situation, especially now with his heart problems. What if he dies here? What if the kids find him? Did you think about that?" Silas stood frozen, his hand gripping the doorframe so tightly the wood dug into his palm, waiting, praying for his son to defend him, to show a spark of the man Silas had raised him to be. The silence stretched, thin and agonizing, and then came the single devastating word from Michael, small, defeated, and utterly final. "Okay. Okay, I'll tell him tomorrow. Just stop yelling." That okay was not just a word, it was an execution. It wasn't Jennifer's naked cruelty that ultimately destroyed him. It was his son's quiet, cowardly betrayal. Did not sleep. He sat in the profound darkness of his room, the echoes of their conversation carving out caverns of emptiness inside him. Memories, vivid and painful, flickered behind his eyes like a tragic film reel, teaching a freckle-faced Michael to ride a bike, the pride on his son's face at college graduation, the tearful hug when he'd handed them the check for this very house. Every sacrifice, every bailout, every moment of support had been a brick in a foundation that had just collapsed into dust. As the first gray light of dawn bled around the edges of the window blind, the raw, screaming grief began to undergo a transformation. Tea cooled and hardened in the furnace of his betrayal, crystallizing into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. He moved to the closet, pushed aside the hanging shirts that smelled faintly of this alien life, and retrieved a small, heavy lockbox from the highest shelf. The combination lock clicked open with a satisfying series of thuds. Inside, hidden beneath old passports and birth certificates, were the documents that told the true story of his life. The most recent private banking statement glowed in the dim light, the numbers a stark black and white repudiation of everything he had just endured, a balance of $12,347,000. They had seen a sick, burdensome old man. They were about to meet the shrewd, strategic businessman who had built an empire. A cold, grim smile, the first genuine expression to touch his face in years, finally curved his lips. The test was conclusively, catastrophically over. They had failed. And now the education would begin. The next morning, the kitchen was a minefield of unspoken words. Michael stood by the expensive espresso machine, his shoulders hunched with the weight of his impending treachery. "Dad," he began, not meeting Silas's gaze, staring into his coffee mug as if it contained a script. "I've been thinking maybe it would be better, for everyone if you found your own place. More space. More independence for your health." The words were clumsy, rehearsed, and utterly devoid of conviction. Silas looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw clearly for the first time the man he had become. A hollowed-out vessel, shaped and dominated by a woman who valued appearances above all else. A man who chose the path of least resistance even when it led through the heart of his father. "I understand completely, Michael," Silas replied, his voice a flat, controlled lake of calm that betrayed none of the storm raging within. "I'll begin making arrangements today." The shock that flashed across Michael's face, the absence of the expected guilt, the pleading, the emotional manipulation, was a small bitter satisfaction. Diamond-hard resolve. He moved to the closet, pushed aside the hanging shirts that smelled faintly of this alien life, and retrieved a small heavy lockbox from the highest shelf. The combination lock clicked open with a satisfying series of thuds. Inside, hidden beneath old passports and birth certificates, were the documents that told the true story of his life. The most recent private banking statement glowed in the dim light, the numbers a stark black-and-white repudiation of everything he had just endured, a balance of $12,347,000. They had seen a sick, burdensome old man. They were about to meet the shrewd, strategic businessman who had built an empire. A cold, grim smile, the first genuine expression to touch his face in years, finally curved his lips. The test was conclusively, catastrophically over. They had failed. And now the education would begin. The next morning, the kitchen was a minefield of unspoken words. Michael stood by the expensive espresso machine, his shoulders hunched with the weight of his impending treachery. "Dad," he began, not meeting Silas's gaze, staring into his coffee mug as if it contained a script. "I've been thinking maybe it would be better, for everyone if you found your own place. More space. More independence for your health." The words were clumsy, rehearsed, and utterly devoid of conviction. Silas looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw clearly for the first time the man he had become. A hollowed-out vessel, shaped and dominated by a woman who valued appearances above all else. A man who chose the path of least resistance even when it led through the heart of his father. "I understand completely, Michael," Silas replied, his voice a flat, controlled lake of calm that betrayed none of the storm raging within. "I'll begin making arrangements today." The shock that flashed across Michael's face, the absence of the expected guilt, the pleading, the emotional manipulation, was a small bitter satisfaction. That very day, while Michael and Jennifer went through the motions of their lives, careful to avoid him, Silas got to work. He called a realtor, Diane Morrison, his voice steady and authoritative. "My budget is $600,000, he stated, and I'll be paying in cash." The stunned pause on the other end of the line was a brief, sweet melody. He toured properties and found one, a stunning modern fortress of white stone and glass in West Shore, with a gated driveway and a backyard that overlooked a quiet, tree-lined canal. It was a home that spoke of power, privacy, and peace. He made a full-price cash offer that same afternoon, and the machinery of his new life was set in motion with breathtaking speed in the morning of his departure. He woke before dawn in the cramped room that had been his gilded cage. He dressed with slow, deliberate care, folding the last of his clothes into a suitcase. The house was silent, pregnant with the tension of his imminent absence. On their pristine kitchen table, he left 2 items. The first was the final envelope, bulging with $3,000 in cash, a last, deeply ironic payment for services never rendered. The second was a single sheet of paper. "Thank you for your hospitality these 3 years. I have found new housing and will be out by noon today. Don't trouble yourselves about the sick old man anymore. The envelope is this month's contribution. Dad." He had chosen the phrase "sick old man" with the care of a poet selecting the perfect word, ensuring the barb of Jennifer's own venom would lodge deep in their conscience. He watched from his window as Jennifer herded the children into her white SUV, their voices bright and oblivious, and a pang of loss, sharp and clean, went through him for the grandchildren he was leaving behind. The movers arrived precisely at 8, and with a quiet, ruthless efficiency, they erased all evidence of his 3-year residence. By 11, the room was empty, echoing with the ghost of his presence. He stood for a moment in the doorway, then turned, walked out of the house for the last time, dropped the key into the mailbox with a final metallic clink, and drove away without a single glance in the rearview mirror. The silence in his new sun-drenched home was not empty. It was full of potential, a vast, quiet space that belonged only to him.